Buyurun hocam.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests, academics, and the administrative staff of our university, and students, you're all welcome to our program, Ambassadors Speak to Us. Today, this program will start with the very distinguished guest from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç'in, within entitled as the program, Peace Building in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the initial success that has been reversed. And today, the program will be hosted by the Istanbul Commerce University Rectorate and the Research Center for Neighboring Countries and Regions. In the beginning of the program, our rector, Professor Dr. Yücel Uğurlu, sends his greetings and welcoming to our distinguished guest, Ambassador Mr. Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç'in. And he was not here because he is in meeting also. This is why he just sent his greetings and sent his best wishes for this program. You are all welcome, and this program will be continued on live YouTube at Istanbul Chamber of Commerce and Istanbul Ticaret University Broadcasting Live. And let me give the speech to the Emir Hadzikaduniç'in, but before doing this, I will give a short introduction of him, that he was ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, both Malezya and in Iran, and now he is an academic at Bosnia and Herzegovina. Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç'in has extensive professional and academic experience in international relations and foreign policy. That includes professional service as ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina to Iran between the years 2010 and 13, and Malaysia between 2016 and 20. Service for peace building missions in both EU, UNDP, and USAID. Lecturing and guest lecturing at the International University of Sarajevo and Sarajevo School of Science and Technology and other universities in Southeast Europe, Malaysia, and Singapore. He has written extensively on international relations, foreign affairs, and peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina for academic journals and international media outlets, and he had authored 2 books and co-authored other publications. Yes, and now we can go with the Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç'in, and the topic is peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the initial success that has been reversed. Yes, Mr. Ambassador, you are welcome, and you can start your topic.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction. Dear professors, dear students, friends, it is my honor to speak today on the topic of peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the initial success that has been reversed. First of all, I will give you some introductory remarks about the topic itself. Then I will offer 2 interrelated propositions. And finally, and most importantly, I will provide empirical evidence to support both of them. So, the peace process in Bosnia and Herzegovina has been most successful in the initial post-Dayton phase from 1995 to 2006-2007. Throughout that period, peace in Bosnia did not mean a mere absence of war. It also reflected various efforts in support of legal, political, and institutional transformation necessary for the recovery, for the state's recovery from a devastated war in the early 90s. Thus, reforms in Bosnia's key sectors in that particular phase resulted in new state institutions in areas of defense, intelligence, security, judiciary, just to name a few, that guaranteed more stability and rule of law. However, recovery of Bosnia was less successful at later stages, especially after 2008. Since that year, many intellectuals, scholars, policy experts have lamented that the country was failing or is at serious risk of failing. Some parties actually voiced their ambition to oppose now key reforms undertaken after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement. So the question is this: why 2 phases in Bosnia and Herzegovina produce different outcomes? In other words, what was behind the agreement's initial success, and what led to it losing its efficacy? Finally, what are the struggles that lie ahead for Bosnia and even the region at large if the current trajectory is not reversed? To answer these questions that I raised today, I combine geopolitical realities outside the national borders of Bosnia as an independent variable on one side, and empirical evidence on the progress or lack of it within Bosnia on the other. First, I explore the strength of changing external realities, namely the Euro-Atlantic pillars with direct influence on politics and reforms in Bosnia. Second, I explore the role of Russia, representing a rival geopolitical pole with opposing stimulus. It is significant to evaluate how these system-level factors and determinants outline key pressure on BIH, as well as predict likely course of BIH in the future. My lecture today has two interrelated propositions, as I said in my introductory part. First proposition, it is not a coincidence that the golden phase of the post-war recovery in Bosnia overlapped with unquestioned authority of European and Euro-Atlantic communities, their liberal and institutional agenda, historic expansion towards Central and Eastern Europe from late 1990s to 2004. Here, I argue that Euro-Atlantic liberal, institutional, and rules-based order was instrumental for political stability and gradual progress in Bosnia. My second proposition, as rules-based order within European and Euro-Atlantic communities gradually eroded itself, the peace process in Bosnia correspondingly reversed as well. Many also recognized the in-depth impacts of Russia's U-turn in European geopolitics and its illiberal tendencies that gradually stalled progress in Bosnia. In other words, I demonstrate here what happens in Bosnia when Euro-Atlantic order is fading away, or worse, what occurs when Russia, as a rival geopolitical pole, attempts to project its power within Bosnia at the cost of Euro-Atlantic alliance. This particular trajectory with opposing power dyads within Bosnian state is often lamented as a nightmare for a Dayton peace agreement that put an end to the bloody war in 1995 and kept the country in one piece for more than 2 decades. Okay, now let me discuss some empirical evidence for the first proposition. Throughout the initial post-Dayton phase, the NATO and EU have offered system-wide benefits and patiently put in place new structures and policies so the country can move forward in the peace process. They largely followed the dictates of liberal notions to strengthen the rule of law, democracy, and institutions. What also made two converging factors of post-war recovery in Bosnia more appealing rests on an enduring combination of their hard and soft power as well. Now I present empirical evidence in chronological order. First of all, two strong UN-mandated but NATO-led missions in Bosnia, Implementation Force, or IFOR, and Stabilization Force, or SFOR, have not only deterred threats to peace and security in Bosnia from late 1995 to 2004, but they also have allowed a refugee return. They trained and restructured armed forces of Bosnia, and they helped civil authorities and other international agencies toward a common goal. For example, key indicators of the success of the IFOR mission were the first post-war national elections and the safe return of over 200,000 displaced persons and refugees. By the end of SFOR mission in 2004, a single Ministry of Defense, a single chain of command, and unified armed forces of Bosnia were established out of 3 opposing forces that fiercely fought each other in the early 1990s. Bosnian state authorities adopted also common foreign policy aspirations to join EU and to join NATO as well. In the absence of any major incidents, the number of IFOR and SFOR missions dropped from 60,000 large force from late 1995 to only 7,000 in 2004. This was a clear indication of a steady success of the military implementation of the peace process, which includes also disarmament, necessary reduction of armed forces, their professional training, and so on and so forth. Second, the EU offered a strong membership perspective to the countries of Southeast Europe, including Bosnia and Herzegovina, as added value to these military missions. That perspective was highlighted through the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, launched in June 1999, and the Stabilization and Association process, also launched in 1999, and then strengthened at the Thessaloniki EU Summit in 2003. So the EU roadmap highlighted generally the process of change that included adaptation to various EU standards, largely in areas of democracy, rule of law, and internal economic market. The SAP, Stabilization and Association process in particular, has brought a relevant conditionality for each country, including Bosnia, to strengthen their democratic and economic institutions. The dominant logic underpinning the EU conditionality was a bargaining strategy of reinforcement by reward, under which the EU provides external incentives, external help for target governments, again including Bosnia, to comply with its conditions. Through EU leverage, reforms in Bosnia's key sectors that were underway in judiciary from 2002-2004, economy 2003-2005, border security 2000-2002, intelligence 2002, public broadcasting 2005, to name just a few, resulted in the formation of new state institutions that increased stability and strengthened the rule of law, transparency, and free market. Bosnia has also strengthened a very weak state government from 3 ministries only in 1995, when the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed, to more functional cabinet of 10 ministries at the state level. This happened in 2003. It is also not a coincidence that a golden phase of the post-war recovery in Bosnia overlapped with the historic EU and NATO expansions towards Central and Eastern Europe from the late 1990s to 2004. Furthermore, Russia was on board as well as a constructive partner. Throughout this period, Russia was an active member of NATO's Partnership for Peace. In 1997, NATO leaders and President Boris Yeltsin, they signed a NATO-Russia Funding Act expressing their determination to build together a lasting and inclusive peace in Euro-Atlantic area on the principles of democracy and cooperative security. So this liberal unipolarity within Europe and enthusiasm for integration helped motivate local Bosnian constituencies, different ethnic groups within Bosnia, to accept the conditions for peace set out in the peace agreement. Moreover, reconciliatory attempts by parties whose members committed war crimes were more regular as well. For example, Dragan Čavić, then president of Bosnian Serb majority entity called Republika Srpska, made a public apology for the Srebrenica genocide in 2004, calling it the black page in Serbian history. Milorad Dodik, a current Serb member of Bosnian tripartite presidency, he also admitted genocide in Srebrenica and criticized indicted war criminals such as Radovan Karadzic or Ratko Mladic in 2006. By 2004, about half of Bosnia's 500,000 destroyed homes were also rebuilt, and some 200,000 disputed properties were effectively given back to people who had been forced to flee the war. A stunning achievement in the light of lawless conditions that prevailed when the process began. Domestic institutions in Bosnia have also undertaken election supervision from the OSCE, as the Bosnian parliament adopted election law in 2004. All these achievements were so remarkable in Bosnia that different commentators, including your speaker today, celebrated successful Bosnia's passage from the phase of Dayton to the phase of Brussels. Prominent institutes like Brookings from the US also regarded lessons from Bosnia as a model to apply in other war-torn countries such as Iraq. Nevertheless, in the last 10-15 years, the international peace-building efforts were gradually reversed, and prospects for renewed instability started to emerge in Bosnia. One of the main architects of the Dayton Peace Agreement, late Richard Holbrooke, and the fourth High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, late Lord Paddy Ashdown, they wrote a joint editorial in 2008, warning that Bosnia was sleepwalking, I quote them, sleepwalking into another crisis. They also desperately appealed to Brussels and Washington to take immediate and concerted action to reverse the course of the country. Other scholars also argued that the country stands on the brink of collapse. For example, Roberto Belloni, he said that the process of implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement in Bosnia has come to a halt. Particularly since 2006, nationalist rhetoric has increased. Political, economic, and social reforms have stalled, and some analysts warn that the country might be sliding towards collapse. Ever since that time, many more academics, diplomats, policy experts have analyzed actual and specific threats that occasionally evolved in a fragile state that dangerously floats on a thin line between peace and instability. The question is what has triggered this turning point, and how more divergent goals between three constituent groups in Bosnia have arisen. So now let me discuss some empirical evidence for my second proposition. Indeed, for a dozen years now, Bosnia and Herzegovina has been in a peaceful deadlock. The causes for slower reintegration since 2006, 2007, 2008 can be analyzed domestically. However, the nature of many interrelated attributes, factors within the state could not alone trigger this particular stalemate in Bosnia for one obvious reason. Domestic factors in Bosnia, such as inter-ethnic divisions, religious differences, internal political fights, struggles, poverty, or even corruption, have been largely uninterrupted throughout both phases. So apart from causes that can be found internally, there are also external triggers of ethnic conflict. When such geopolitical dynamics converged with troubling internal realities that are present in Bosnia, this created a new context of instability with underlying causes that make any country prone to uncertainty. In the case of Bosnia, it was largely the nature of external environment outside the national border that has shifted and became more unfavorable in the post-2005 period. Instead of being rapid, these changes were slower and constantly adding up. First, the EU passed through a constitutional crisis that undermined its credibility as a transformation power, active in Bosnia. The rejection of a treaty establishing a European constitution by French and Dutch voters in 2005 has drawn the EU into a deep crisis. New enlargement enthusiasm has also waned, and states in the EU-led SAP process, including Bosnia, were largely left on their own. So far, only Croatia has managed to reach full membership status from the group of 7 Western Balkan countries. Second, NATO-led peacekeeping mission SFOR that I mentioned earlier was replaced by a much weaker EU-led mission Althea in 2004. Today, the remaining 600 EU peacekeepers in Bosnia are in no position to guarantee Bosnian stability or fulfill the mandate of the Dayton Peace Agreement. In the meantime, the US has also shifted its focus from Bosnia to Kosovo. At the regional level, Kosovo thus receives the largest share of US foreign assistance to the Balkans, and the two countries cooperate on various security issues. The US is also the largest contributor of troops to the NATO-led Kosovo force. At the international level, the US faced serious security challenges in other troubled areas, such as Iraq and Afghanistan. Its liberal hegemony, as structural realists coined the term, has failed miserably not only in these two countries. The foreign policy of the US also pivoted to Asia in 2011 to prevent rising China from becoming its peer competitor. Thus, local causes such as Serb nationalism and secessionism from Bosnia, which has been checked and contained as a gene in the battle for reasons of strong EU agenda and American geopolitical dominance, freed itself from captivity for opposite reasons. Third, with Russia's U-turn in European geopolitics, Kremlin became more interested in replacing an existing liberal order, primarily the one extended beyond the Iron Curtain, with favorable and less democratic European regimes that fit Russia's image. Russia also became more interested in replacing the hierarchical order in Europe with some unknown and certainly more anarchic multipolar structure. So far, all attempts from the Kremlin to impose its own illiberal and structural order in Europe or the Balkan region, largely constrained by limits of its hard and soft power, have only made young democracies and vulnerable countries scattered around the European periphery, such as Bosnia, more divided and eventually more anarchic. In August 2008, Russia's military intervention in Georgia restored Kremlin's geopolitical relevance in European neighborhood. However, Georgia was divided between Russia-backed self-proclaimed republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia on one hand, and the rest of Georgia on the other. This small triumph encouraged Russia to act again by lopping off Crimea from neighboring Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine was also forcefully divided along similar geostrategic and domestic lines between Kiev's Euro-Atlantic aspirations and secessionist tendencies by a pro-Russian minority in the East. In recent years, Russia has also become more visible in the Balkans, that is, deep inside NATO's eastern borders. As reported by media, Russia fanned the flames of internal crisis in Montenegro in 2015, 2016, and Northern Macedonia 2017, 2018 to stop NATO's expansion. Russia donated and supplied weapons to Serbia and conducted joint military exercise in 2019 and 2021. Kremlin also built partnerships with local power holders in Bosnian entity Republika Srpska and openly destabilized the country's long-established goals and vision for security through Euro-Atlantic integration by opposing Peace Implementation Council in Bosnia and its steering board communiques, including the last one in 2021. In this regard, our proposition that secessionist parties in Bosnia would have obstructed institutional and rules-based post-war recovery had euphoria from Euro-Atlantic integration not existed can be verified historically. It went largely unnoticed that Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik, who accepted genocide in 2006, has held at least 10 official consultations with Vladimir Putin in the last several years, most of which were in his capacity as provincial leader in Republika Srpska. In his second constitutive meeting with the Russian president during critical crisis in Ukraine in 2014, he shared his sympathy for Moscow in a press statement quoted by Kremlin, and I quote one sentence: "Naturally, there is no question that we support Russia. We may be a small and modest community, but our voice is loud." As Dodik's confidence grew with the success of Russia's subversion, so too increased his demands to reverse key institutional reforms undertaken after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement in areas of defense, intelligence, or any other reform conducted in early 2000s. Thus, he threatened to withdraw soldiers out of the country's unified military. He has done this just 2 days ago again. He vowed to demolish mutually agreed and legally binding dynamics for achieving collective security within NATO. He called the UN-mandated EU peacekeeping mission in the country, Operation Althea, to be terminated, all of which present a significant security dilemma for the country and the Balkans as well. Bosnian Serb entity Republika Srpska also ignored the EU and held an unconstitutional referendum on September 2016, thereby violating a final and binding decision by the Bosnian Constitutional Court. According to the Office of High Representative in Bosnia, in 2016, this referendum follows the long-standing policy of the RS opting out of the judicial system of Bosnia. The crisis in Bosnia culminated in 2020 when Milorad Dodik called this constitutional court in Bosnia, composed of 9 judges, 2 Bosnian Serbs, 2 Bosnian Croats, 2 Bosniaks, and 3 international judges, an occupation court. Addressing RS Assembly just 5 days later, he provokingly declared, "Goodbye Bosnia, welcome RS exit." These tendencies, coupled with Russia's disruption efforts, have made the complex multinational state of Bosnia impossible to govern efficiently. An even more harmful structural change for Bosnia would be the international actors leaving the country altogether. This would encourage local forces to move on with their secessionist agenda, generating serious security issues, making Bosnia more divided, more nationalistic, and prone to new conflicts. Such a path would probably lead to new skirmishes and security dilemmas in the Balkans, which at worst is all too reminiscent of the 1900s, when unintended consequences of nationalist passion led to the murder of millions. It is also widely acceptable that should a referendum for secession take place in Bosnia, the country will collapse. Now my conclusion, which is the trajectory for the future, and with some assumptions. It appears from this analysis that strong American leadership in Europe and effective EU agenda in Bosnia, in Balkans as well, were major factors for stability. In other words, their withdrawal could constitute a rapid change that could trigger a conflict breaking out. Should they leave Bosnia altogether, which is less probable, other extra-regional actors will be invited to fill the vacuum, in which case power relations would inevitably become subject to reconfiguration, and different visions for both Bosnia and the Southeast Europe would have to emerge. Few options. First, a unilateral breakaway of Republika Srpska, Bosnian entity, from Bosnia would effectively tear apart Bosnia's post-war constitutional order of 2 entities, as well as other political and institutional arrangements that have gradually restored peace and security over the last 25 years. The RS secession, if it happens, would also signal an existential threat to the survival of a multi-ethnic state. Second, Serbia, which shares a long border with Bosnia and national sentiments with the secessionist party, is probably the first contender to be caught in the new Bosnian conflict for both internal and external reasons. Third, Turkey would also become entangled in the nightmare of a new Bosnian disorder. On one hand, Turkey and other NATO allies have a common objectives to build a safe and prosperous Bosnia. On the other hand, Turkey also projects its soft power throughout the Balkans, particularly in Bosnia, relying on historical, cultural, and personal ties. Hence, it would likely not agree, Turkey would likely not agree to watch the country's descent into war from the sidelines, especially if its NATO allies and the EU choose to abandon their commitments to safeguard peace in Bosnia. Fourth, this scenario could set Turkey and Russia on a collision course, because Russia's prospects in Serbia and Bosnian entity Republic of Srpska are of highest geopolitical value, having loyal proxies ready to do the Moscow's bidding, not in the European neighborhood, as Ukraine or Georgia is, but deep within external EU borders. At the same time, however, Russia and Turkey possess formidable mediation capacity with the confronting parties in the Bosnia theater that some European powers would oppose on geopolitical and the more liberal ones on ideological grounds. Fifth, the EU would face a major dilemma between a strong multilateral reaction to protect collective peace-building legacy on one side and unilateral moves by individual member states to pursue their national interests on the other side. Washington would also understand, well, that Russia's unchecked incursion within NATO's eastern border would damage American law-led liberal order and alliance structure, and at the same time change the regional and possibly European balance of power to the detriment of the US. However, and this is my last sentence, the very real threats to the hard-achieved peace in Bosnia should not lead anyone to conclude the region is definitely destined for instability and conflict. The US and EU remain key factors of stability in Bosnia, despite the various shortcomings from their side. Notwithstanding its current limitations, liberal, institutional, and rules-based Euro-Atlantic order is also more vital than any illiberal alternative offered by Russia. Within this order, Bosnia still has a good chance of sustaining the peace and fulfilling its aspirations to become indispensable member of the European family. Bosnia also needs to look back at its recent past, remember the devastation it experienced in the early 90s, and collectively work with Euro-Atlantic allies and other friends such as Turkey towards building on the achievements it has accomplished in the early post-Dayton phase, and thus provide prosperous future for the younger generation, for the younger Bosnian generation. So this is my introductory talk. I thank you for your attention and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç, for this very detailed and inspiring presentation on the current position and the changing and projections for the geopolitical concerns, both including the relations with EU, Russia, and the US, which we can call the great powers around the Bosnia and Herzegovina, and have an ability to change the geographical position, both their own influences and the reflections over the current position in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And you mentioned two main arguments which have a detailed sub-argumentation at your presentation, and we saw the opportunities and threats are in front of the Bosnia and Herzegovina. And there was a success at the end of the Dayton Peace Agreement that all the international society lived this experience. And from those perspectives, I would like to ask a question now. How about the current reflections on the Bosnia and Herzegovina society? I mean, how they feel the Bosnians in this change and reflections about their daily lives, politics, or the societal concerns, because they have different alternatives, agendas, or the region is so having a very keen to change different way. How those reflections on the Bosnian society, Mr. Ambassador?
Okay, thank you for this question. Well, Bosnian society is less divided than the kind of political society. Majority of the Bosnians, and I'm speaking about Bosniaks, Serb community, and Bosnian Croat community, they do support Bosnian membership in the EU. Support for the membership in the NATO is less obvious from people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the same time, Bosnian people, individuals in Bosnia, are under strong pressure because this second phase is lasting for more than a decade. And now their choice become to leave the country, to just go outside of Bosnia and find their own individual solutions in Germany, in some other EU member country, to find a settlement there, because the EU is open. They have, whoever is having good education, whoever is having whoever knows the German well, he can go easily. So many Bosnians are choosing this path because they are under pressure for a long time, and they don't see a perspective. The hope that we had in early phase was so large. The hope now is much lower.
Yes, thank you very much for this response again, Mr. Ambassador Hadzikadunić. And also, the students are following the program, and they are very wondering to learn how your diplomatic career came through. I mean, you started your academic life, then focus and sustain some appointments as a diplomat to Malezia and Iran. Maybe you can share your experiences, because you are both being the academic and practical side, and you can also very good merge. At your presentation, you show up how you merged this one from the empirical evidences to the academic changes, and how we can theorize this from international relations perspective. As we can understand from your presentation, the neo-realist and the illiberal perspectives of the changing international order are challenging the country's will and some reflections. And the students, when they find an opportunity to read all these in a journal, that they can also benefit it mostly. But from the practical side, I just wondered to ask how you started your diplomatic career and how was go on and how you feel now.
Yeah, maybe that's a very good question for students who are seeking this opportunity in their future lives. So basically, as in any other country, we have career and non-career diplomats. In diplomatic culture of Bosnia, we have around 20 to 30% of non-career diplomats, which are chosen from academic side, from any other prominent area in a society. So, but my path was quite specific. I did my undergraduate in Malaysia, and there are many Bosnians who did their undergraduates, master, and PhD in Malaysia. When we come back to Bosnia, we created a strong alumni group, which is a very prominent, not only alumni, but also a think tank, NGO, and so on and so forth. So this alumni actually approached Bosnian tripartite presidency in 2008 for the first time, and they had presentation of their activities to the presidency, tripartite presidency. And tripartite presidency was so impressed by their work. So on the second meeting, we thought, like, shall we maybe ask the tripartite presidency to offer one ambassadorship to one member of our alumni? So we did raise this idea to members of the presidency of Bosnia, who are actually deciding about this, and without hoping too much that anybody will get this one. But you know, it happens that they accepted. They offered one position to one of our friends to become, and because we asked this, we just requested Malaysia, because we believe we have good links with Malaysian politics, with Malaysian economics, with Malaysian business side, and we believe we can contribute to bilateral relations between Bosnia and Malaysia. So we insisted on Malaysia only, and they decided positive. They have given us this position. I was not selected as a first one. Then 3 years later, as this new ambassador from our alumni group had very good results, presidency actually told us, now we have four more options for you. Please send us like 10 CVs and we will select few of them. This is how I entered in the second group, and I was accepted as ambassador to Iran, 2010, 2013, and then Malaysia, 2016, 2020. And yeah, it was a kind of specific experience. Basically, I can advise students to have a courage to demonstrate their skills, to have a courage to approach authorities, and to offer themselves, to be on disposal. If they think they can contribute to the Turkey in terms of relationship with any particular country. So I think this can be the way for non-career diplomats.
Thank you very much. And also, being from the academic side, as I head of political science and international relations department at Istanbul Ticaret University. We are always encouraging our students to live their freedom with an action of diplomatic, and they can also see the world is so bigger than they feel, and they should touch the different cultures. They should get these perspectives, and they should strengthen their own country's capabilities by using this academic background. And this also helps to make an effective foreign policy. That is also Turkey and Bosnia and Herzegovina has some very deep and cultural ties and both economic, societal, and security concerns. And this is why maybe we can also develop such specific programs both in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Turkey, as part of being a diplomacy academy, as student reflections, how students can make some models for their academic issues. It can be also output for this program, Mr. Ambassador.
It's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
Just a couple of months ago, a museum, Alija Izetbegović, late Alija Izetbegović, they organized the first diplomatic academy for young students from Bosnia.
Very nice.
And I attended this academy as a lecturer, as a former ambassador.
Congratulations.
We are so happy to have ambassadors speaking to them about their experience in embassy, their experience while they are on meetings in the foreign ministry, their multilateral experience, and so on and so forth. So this is a brilliant idea. Students would love it, and I fully support.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can go further with you as a part of a institutional model, how we can make this as a body.
I would be honored to be part of this program.
Thank you very much. It would be honor for us as well. And here I will have a last question, then we can go the concluding part of our program. As we understand from your speech and your presentation, there is different alternatives in front of the Bosnia and Herzegovina, but these alternatives and some challenges should have a good governance. I mean, which type of governance will be best for these alternatives, opportunities, threats? I mean, how can Bosnia and Herzegovina should focusing on to manage these different parameters? In what ways? I mean,
yeah, it is a
critical. It is a personal question.
Yeah, this is a critical question for all of us, and different people are thinking about this all the time. It is an open-ended question. I would say that this is the clash between liberal ideas and neo-realist ideas. Yeah. If liberal ideas will win in Bosnia, then of course the governance would be multilateral. We would have these options related to EU and NATO, rules-based order, institutional order. But if a neo-realist ideas will eventually win in Bosnia and the region and larger European context, then we have to think about alternative options as well. What are those options? It's hard to guess, but we have to apply the rules of neo-realism, which is balancing behavior. We cannot apply liberal rules, which is kind of interdependence, democratic peace, and so on and so forth. So we have to think in terms of balancing behavior and see who can help us to survive. First of all, our goal would be to survive as a multi-ethnic state. We don't have an option for division. Bosnians will never agree to divide itself. Our only option is to stay as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society and a multi-religious country. So we will defend this, and our goal would be to survive as a multi-ethnic country. It would be much more difficult to do this within a realist framework, but it would be, of course, much more easier within a liberal framework. It depends which one will win. Sure. So we are closely following developments in a practical life, and we are also following debates within different school of thoughts that are basically bringing these ideas and help us understand what is going on in a region and in a wider world.
And thank you very much for this again a qualified response about the question with it, the different perspectives of IR theories and how the reflections can be from the execution side and your personal remarks about the question. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And now, dear distinguished guests, academics, and the administrative staff and students of our university, today we had a very good meeting and also presentation of Ambassador Dr. Emir Hadzikaduniç on peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the initial success that has been reversed. And we have also talked about the reflections, current position, geopolitical strengths and weaknesses of the country and the power balance between US, Russia, and the EU around the country, and what will be the reflections, both regional and global one, and also how Turkey can position itself with these changes. And very thank you to the Emir Hadzikaduniç for this participation. And this event was already done with the Istanbul Commerce University Rectorate and the Research Center for Neighboring Countries and Regions. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I was so happy to meet your students, and I hope to meet them again in the future.
We as well, and I hope we can do this one as the spring term as a face-to-face conference, or the different models that the students can also participate. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.